Welcome to episode 56 of FBI Retired Case File Review with Jerry Williams. I'm a retired agent writing crime fiction inspired by actual true crime FBI cases. In this episode, we are again speaking with Max Noel about the Unabomber Terrorist Ted Kaczynski case. This is part 2. As you recall, in part 1, we got to the point where the FBI had been able to finally identify the true name of the Unabomber, and that this was done primarily through comparison of his manifesto to his known writing supplied by his brother, sister-in-law, and his mother. As a reminder, retired agent Max Noel served nearly 31 years with the FBI. As he was nearing retirement, he was asked to take over as the supervisor of the investigative taskforce for the Unabomber. This task force was made up of FBI employees, ATF, postal inspectors, and a number of local and state police departments. Before this task force had been created by then Attorney General Janet Reno and FBI Director Louis Freeh, for approximately 15 years, all of these different agencies have been trying on their own, working mostly independently, to identify the person responsible for all of these bombings. In part 2, we are now going to find out how the FBI and other members of the task force were able to arrest Ted Kaczynski. Because remember now, he has been able to blow up and booby trap airplanes and packages. How do you go into his cabin and take him out and search for the evidence you need when bombs could be packed inside that tiny space? But before we get to that interview, I want you to know I have finally made it to 50 reviews of my crime novel, Pay to Play, over at Amazon. And I have 2 listeners that I need to thank for getting me to that magic number. I want to thank Amazon reader who wrote, "Compelling read. As a retired FBI agent, this author brings a wealth of knowledge about law enforcement and the criminal underworld. The exciting details and unforeseen plot twists held my attention throughout. I highly recommend this thrill ride and the author's podcast." Now, the second review that brought me up to that magic 50 reviews is from listener Michael Roberts. I have to tell you, Michael, great job, but I'm not sure if this counts as a book review. I certainly appreciate you going out of your way to help me get to 50 reviews, but I think Amazon wants you to actually read the book first. So technically, I'm at 49 because Michael admits in his review that he hasn't gotten around to reading the book. He heard me read an excerpt of Pay to Play in the podcast. Thanks a lot, Michael. Your review does not need to go to waste. You can cut and paste it over as a podcast review on iTunes. Now, I did read a book this week. I hope you stick around after part 2 so that I can tell you all about it. Now, here's the show. All right, Max, we're back. Last episode, we had a chance to talk about all the things that you did to investigate the case and try to come up with a suspect. And at the end, we had been able to identify Ted Kaczynski. You've now met with the brother. The brother has given you additional information. The mother has given you additional correspondence. What percentage would you say you are sure that this is the Unabomber?
Well, everyone else was absolutely positive it was the Unabomber. I wasn't.
And why weren't you? What was the hesitation?
I'm an old criminal agent. We've got a man living in rural Lincoln, Montana, in a cabin with no electricity, with no running water, and no means of transportation, who has been alleged to have been traveling to Sacramento and San Francisco Bay Area and putting bombs into the mail with no visible means of support. If you look at all of the forensic reports that we were getting from all the various forensic laboratories, we polled every forensic laboratory in the world. We had Livermore National Laboratory's new forensic unit assisting us. We had the Oak Ridge National Laboratory forensic unit assisting us. We had ATS Laboratory, Postal's Laboratory, the FBI Laboratory. We had laboratories from the aluminum industry, from the glue industry, and from all things coming and telling us what we should be looking for. The bomber was casting aluminum parts for his bombs, and the aluminum industry told us that he couldn't do that without a kiln. He had to have a kiln to do that. We had a whole project of identifying everyone in the United States buying a home kiln to try to find someone who could fit into what we were looking for. So we had forensic laboratories telling us he had to have a certain power tool to do these certain cuts on these particular parts of the bomb, and they articulated what these electrical pieces of equipment were that he needed and so forth. So if those were all true and those are the experts, how is this guy living in the middle of nowhere with no electricity or running water and no visible means of support or transportation doing all of this? I don't care if he spelled analyze incorrectly or something else incorrectly or used an idiom that his brother said that he was the only person he ever knew. How is he doing all this? How's he accomplishing that? How are we ever going to prove that? So I said, hey, I'll do my work, and hey, this is a great suspect, and I'll do whatever. But, you know, it's going to take more than spelling a word wrong or doing a linguistic comparison to get me to believe that this is a person that did it. And so we sent teams of agents back to work with his mother and his brother in Illinois and New York. We sent agents down to Texas, where his brother had a rural cabin where he had a whole bunch of documents stored that he'd gotten from Ted, to get those documents and analyze them and what have you. And I got selected to be the agent to go to rural Montana to develop PC for either a search or an arrest warrant, adding to the warrant. Terry Turchie was developing the warrant. You just can't go to a court and say, hey, we want a search or an arrest warrant for a guy who lives somewhere in rural Lincoln, Montana. You need some specificity for the warrant. And no one had seen the cabin that he lived in. It didn't have an address. It was on a rural route. His brother told us it was about 4.5 miles south of Lincoln. So when Jim Freeman proposed that I go and do this, my request to him was, we don't need to do it in a typical bureau fashion where we throw hundreds of agents up there. This is a small town in the middle of a rural area. I don't care how well we disguise ourselves and what have you, they're going to know we're there before we ever. I grew up in a small rural community. So let me go with a small group of people. And he agreed. So I went to Montana with 3 people. A younger agent than me, Dave Weber, who's a former Marine, former firearms. He succeeded me in the firearms program in San Francisco. A man-wife team, boyfriend-girlfriend team, John Gray and Candace DeLong, and a postal inspector named Paul Wilhelmus. And we went to Helena, and we began putting together the PC for either a search or an arrest warrant. First of all, we had to find the cabin. We had to get out there to rural Lincoln, Montana, and find the cabin. That was an extremely difficult thing because Ted Kaczynski's cabin was at the back of a box canyon of which there was no access to it in the middle of the winter except right up the mouth of the canyon, and we knew we didn't want to do that. We didn't want to tip him off. We were fearful that he would flee into the mountains and we never would find him. And we were.
What time of the year is this?
February. So
wow.
There was tons of snow in rural Montana. So we got to Helena, and we started doing that work. We asked our senior resident agent in Helena, who was housing us, as to who the best person in that area of Montana would be to work with from a law enforcement standpoint. And he didn't hesitate. He said, there's no question in my mind that it's Jerry Burns, a Forest Service police officer. He grew up in Lincoln, Montana. He knows everyone in Lincoln, Montana. He graduated from high school. He's a decorated Vietnam War veteran. He's a super person, and he's who we need to use. So I requested that Tom get Jerry to come into Helena, sit down with us, and we proposed to him what we wanted him to do and so forth. And he said, I'd love to work with you full time, but in order to do that, I need permission of my boss, who's a gentleman named Tom King. And you're probably in luck because Tom King's special agent in charge of my area, and he's a former FBI agent. And here's his number. He's in Missoula. And so I called Tom, and I told Tom, I said, Tom, my name is Max Noel. I'm up here on a bureau special, and I really need the use of Jerry Burns and the resources of the United States Forest Service Department. Could you let us use Jerry full-time and have the resources? And he said, no problem at all, Max. Just keep me apprised if there's anything that affects the United States Forest Service. And I said, you got it. So now Jerry's on our team.
Did he ask any questions? Did he know it was the Unabomber case?
Nope. I told him I couldn't tell him what the investigation was. And he said, no problem. I understand. Just keep me apprised if it affects the Forest Service. And I said, absolutely. So then, using Jerry, because he knew everybody in and around there, I developed a cooperating witness, what I call a cooperating witness, Butch Gearing, who owned the mountain above Ted Kaczynski and all the property around him, and whose father had sold the 1.4 acres upon which Kaczynski's cabin sat to Kaczynski 25 years before, 30 years before. And Jerry introduced me to Butch. We got Butch into our confidence without telling him why we were looking at Kaczynski in particular, because we didn't know what his reaction was, and it was the greatest thing in the world to develop him. Now we're back to traditional criminal-type investigation, and Butch had a lumber mill at the mouth of the canyon, one-man lumber mill. He was it. So Butch became our eyes and ears in the canyon and provided us with lots of good information about who we could talk to and who we couldn't talk to. And so we didn't come and go from Lincoln, or we didn't stay in Lincoln, Montana. We came and went. Lincoln, Montana is the midway point almost between Missoula and Great Falls on State Highway 200. And it's kind of a meeting area for salesmen and salespeople on the road, a couple of restaurants that they stop in. So coming and going wasn't a problem. Had we have stayed there, we would have raised some eyebrows. It wasn't until the very end, toward the very end, before we served the warrant, that we introduced people into Lincoln on a full-time basis, and we took our man-wife team, John Gray and Candace DeLong, and put them in a motel right behind the bus stop. The only way to public transportation in and out of Lincoln, Montana was through a bus line, Rimrock Trailways.
And so that was to conduct a surveillance on Ted to make sure he didn't leave.
Well, we couldn't really conduct a surveillance on him because of where he lived and the location. But he had no way of getting out of town other than riding his little bike or taking the trailways. And by this time, we'd established that his preferred method of transportation was the bus line. He'd pedal his bike 4.5 miles into town, store it in a real estate office, go to the Rainbow Cafe, which was the bus stop, wait for the bus, and get on either the westbound bus going to Missoula or the eastbound bus going to Great Falls. So their purpose in being there was to meet those two buses every day. One was at 4 o'clock in the afternoon, one was at 7 o'clock in the evening, and ensure that Ted Kaczynski wasn't getting on that bus with a bomb or getting on the bus, period. And that was for the last about 10 days that we were there. So we conducted that very covert, surreptitious investigation. Butch Gearing was our eyes and ears out there. Butch would go every day and make sure that Ted was in his cabin. He walked me up a skid road one day. Butch owned the skid road that went up the mountain right beside the cabin. He walked me up there one day so I could get a look at the cabin, so I could describe it with specificity for the warrant. And Kaczynski heard us. Dog scared a deer up, and he stepped out of the cabin to take a look. And I still remember seeing him step out of that cabin and look over at us. And I said to myself, my God, is that what we've been looking for 16 years. It was unbelievable.
Describe him.
His hair was a mess. It was greasy and long and woolly. His clothing was rotting off of him. I couldn't smell him yet because I was about 40 yards away, but it was just not the image of this person who'd been avoiding detection for some 16 years, of whom now I knew was had a 170 IQ and was a former professor of mathematics and had a PhD. And I mean, it just was not the image that I had conjured up of the person that we were looking for. So Butch Gearing would check every day. Every night there'd be a little skiff of snow, and you could tell if anyone had come and gone from the cabin through the footprints, and Butch became our eyes and ears, providing us with valuable information about Ted Kaczynski and his habits and so on and so forth.
Let me ask you, while you guys are in Montana doing all of this work, what's going on back in San Francisco at the task force? Are they doing additional investigative things in order to prepare?
They're putting together a search warrant. The team of agents is back east with David Kaczynski and Linda Patrick Kaczynski and the mother, Wanda. As I said, we had a team that went to Texas to put together that information. They're doing the analysis of the writings of Ted Kaczynski. They're doing the timeline analysis, and they're writing the affidavit. Although we had an affidavit project, we had the outline of the affidavit, but now we're having to plug in specific events to the affidavits in order to take it to the court. Terry Turchie is doing the affidavit. Lee Stark, who became the case agent on Ted Kaczynski's case, Kathy Puckett and Jim Wilson are back in Illinois and New York dealing with the family. So, yeah, there's things going on all over. And what I was doing in Montana, I'm well aware of, but I'm not so well aware of what's going on in these other areas. And, of course, they're getting more and more excited with the timeline and the analyses and so on and so forth. I'm focused on developing probable cause for the search warrant with the cabin location, the cabin description, and other things that we were doing in Montana. We were going to hotels and motels in Helena, in Missoula, in Great Falls, and determining whether or not he was staying there in time periods where he would have had to have traveled to the out of that area carrying his bombs and so forth, and getting that documentation. So there's 1,000 things going on. But during all of this, there was, because of the investigative strategy that we'd employed, which had a big component of cooperation with and utilization of the media, there was an intense media interest in this case. And through one way or another, they were tracking, and they found out, and, media has great sources just like we do. We don't think, we always think that we're invisible sometimes and other people don't see what we're doing. But when we went to Helena, for instance, I was concerned about that. So my small group of people, we didn't stay in traditional hotels or motels. We found an out-of-the-way bed and breakfast that we rented for the 4 of us, and or the 5 of us, and we stayed there because I knew the media would have sources in hotels and airports and things like that, just like we do. So we stayed in a bed and breakfast so that if they were looking for us and tracking us, they couldn't find us. Well, yes, they were looking for us, and yes, they were tracking us, and they kept coming back to our press relations person, George Grotz, and asking him, we heard you had a good suspect, and then we heard you had a good suspect in the Pacific Northwest, and we heard you had a good suspect with a Polish last name living somewhere in Montana, and then pretty soon they dropped the hammer and said, okay, we know you had a good suspect in Montana somewhere outside of Helena. His name is Kaczynski, and we want permission to accompany you when you serve the warrant.
Wow.
And we said no. Now, I'm telling you right now what I know. Louis Freeh wrote his book and said this didn't happen. The Dan rather wrote his book and said it didn't happen. But I'm the guy that had to walk up on the door of the most successful booby trapper in the history of the United States who'd killed 3 people and exposed myself and 2 others to that danger. And I didn't do that because the arrest plan was to wait for him to come out of that cabin and pedal to town on his bicycle where he was vulnerable and we could snatch him up before we served the warrant. But we weren't given that opportunity because the media said, unless you allow us to accompany you, we're going to run this story on 60 Minutes this week.
No.
Yes.
No, because Ted Kaczynski didn't have electricity.
That's right.
You know that he's not going to be watching 60 Minutes that week or reading newspaper reports.
We didn't think so, but we know that from several of the things that he wrote, he was monitoring some way the news and what was going on. And we strongly suspected, we knew he didn't have a TV, we knew he had no electricity, we strongly suspected that he had a battery-operated radio that he was listening to. And he did. So now the decision has to be made. Can we get him out and honor our agreement with David of that cabin without setting up a standoff and having a situation like Ruby Ridge or Waco go? As I said, the original arrest plan was, and I felt quite confident in it, he's got to come out of there sometime. I was up there for almost 4 months, and he never left the vicinity of his cabin. So sooner or later, he's got to go to town to get supplies or do something. We'll just wait till he pedals on his bike, and as he's going down Stemple Pass Road, we'll swoop in and grab him.
And was that 4 months just waiting for that opportunity, or was that 4 months because you had all these things you needed to do anyway?
Well, it wasn't exactly 4. It was whenever the warrant got ready and whenever he presented us with the opportunity of grabbing him, It was twofold. It was based upon what he did, to some extent. The warrant was pretty much ready. We would have gone with it shortly after we detained him, whatever it was. But now we know that we've got a time frame. We've got to operate before that.
And you have no idea how the media learned this information.
I know now, but I didn't then. No, I just knew they were tracking us and trying to find us and so forth. So, the media does their job and we do our job, and they have their sources and they have their methods of finding things out just like we do, and they were pretty close.
And this was a hot case. I mean, this was news.
Oh, this was big news. So Jim Freeman came to me and he said that Dan Rather had approached Louis Freeh back on the East Coast on behalf of 60 Minutes, and that Dan Rather's investigative reporter here on the West Coast had approached Jim Freeman here with the information and wanting us to allow them to accompany us on our service of the warrant. Was there any alternative plan that I had developed that would allow us to safely remove him from that cabin without a Ruby Ridge or a Waco standoff? And so I proposed to him my secondary plan, and Jim liked it. And it wasn't so much as my plan as it was what Butch Gearing and Jerry Burns and Tom McDaniel and I had conspired together and thought this would be a great alternative. And we were able to walk up to that cabin and entice him out of the cabin without knowing who we were and take him into custody without much of a struggle or almost with a whimper. And later on, I was very pleased that many hours later, when we booked him into the Lewis and Clark County Jail in Helena, he told me that the way we enticed him out of the cabin was about the only way we would have gotten him out of the cabin. He had a loaded .25 automatic on the shelf right beside the front door. He had a .30-06 and a .22 rifle hanging a short distance away within 4 or 5 feet of him, and he made the fatal mistake of stepping out and putting himself within arm's reach of Jerry and Tom, and I got to announce to him who we were and identify ourselves, and we removed him safely from the cabin.
All right. Now, I am so curious. You have created the suspense. What was Plan B? What did you do?
That's a long story. I'm trying to be brief here. We were looking for alternatives to this from the very beginning. So we had a feeling that he was very protective of his property and his surroundings and very observant and what have you. Early on, we decided to get a look at the cabin before Butch Gearing walked me up to the cabin. Jerry Burns took snowmobiles, Forest Service snowmobiles, and Jerry and Tom McDaniel from the Helena RA and Dave Weber, my younger companion from the task force, took the snowmobiles and went on a Forest Service contour trail which led up the mountain around behind Ted's cabin. And then they creepy crawled down through the snow. And this is in February now, so there's tons of snow in this canyon to get a look at the cabin so they'd get a physical description and some pictures, hopefully, of the cabin. As they were approaching, they heard a door open and close. Now, there's only one cabin up there that's occupied, so they presumed it was Kaczynski coming out of the cabin, so they beat a hasty retreat. Later that afternoon, as I have him in custody in an adjacent cabin, as the search is being conducted, he looked at me and he said, "Was that you fellers up on the Humbug Contour Trail back in February?" I said, "What are you talking about?" He said, "I saw evidence of motorized vehicles up on the Humbug Contour Trail back in February and tracks leading down toward my cabin. I think that was you." And he's right. It was.
Wow.
But he didn't recognize it at the time. Then out of the clear blue sky, because he wouldn't talk, he invoked, and he said, "I'll talk to you about anything but the case." Later on in the afternoon, he said, "I had a blue parka on." He said, "Was that you fellers down at the Miller cabin the last several days?" And we had put 2 agents in a cabin at the mouth of the canyon during the day to watch and make sure he didn't get out as we were preparing to go in and serve this search warrant. And I said, "Me? Why would you think it was me?" He said, "I've seen a feller down in that Miller cabin that's got a blue parka just like yours. I think that was you." I said, "No, I haven't been in a Miller cabin." Well, the agent that was down there, Jerry Webb, was wearing a blue parka just like mine.
Wow.
And what we discovered was right behind his cabin was in a stand of lodgepole pine, made it very difficult to see from any distance away except from one angle. And right behind his cabin was this big tall pine tree, probably 60, 70 feet tall. He had a knotted rope hanging from that. And what we determined, Dave Weber climbed the rope and went up in the tree, and you could see he'd worn off limbs crawling to the top of that tree so he could look right down the canyon and see who was coming and going at the mouth of the canyon. And that's obviously what he was doing, because he'd heard some noise down there, and you couldn't see it on ground level, but if you went up that tree, you could look down and see. And he thought he saw us, but he didn't recognize us for what we were, which made me very proud that we were able to get away with that. So, Butch Gearing, who owned the lumber mill, was our cooperating witness and was just a treasure trove of information. And I had asked Butch about, if we had to take him out, how could we do that? And Butch said, "Well, last year I leased the mining exploratory rights to the area, my property, the mountain around his cabin, to a mining company out of Butte, Montana, because this is a big gold mining area." And he said they were up here all summer long, snooping around looking for gold, and they didn't find anything. And he said, "My wife is pregnant, and we're expecting twins, and I'm a sole proprietor of my company, and I have no insurance, and it's going to really be expensive." So in December, before I got there in January, he said, I went up to Kaczynski and said, "Hey, I know you didn't like those guys from that mining company up creeping around your property on my property last year, but I need money, and another mining company has given me a nice amount of money to do the same thing this summer." And he said Kaczynski was just incensed. And he said, "Well, put up with it, Ted. That's the way it goes. I need the money. I'll ensure that they stay off of your property." So anytime we were up there, anywhere near, Dave and I, Weber, drove an old truck that we rented from a local rental agency called Rent a Dent. And we had a little handmade placard with that mining company's name that we'd throw up on the dashboard, just in case anyone was wondering who the hell we were. When we approached his cabin, Tom McDaniel and myself, dressed as everybody does up in the mountains with a parka, and Tom had a big old cowboy hat on. I had a baseball hat on, pair of Wrangler jeans. We went with Jerry Burns, the Forest Service police officer, and Jerry was in full uniform, and Ted Kaczynski knew Jerry Burns. So when we approached the cabin, you just don't walk up to a cabin on private property. You have to have permission, so Jerry started hailing him as we approached. And he knew Jerry. He spoken to Jerry in town and so forth. And there was no reaction from inside the cabin. So when we finally got to the front of the cabin, we heard some stirring inside the cabin and the door opened. And Kaczynski looked at Jerry and says, "Yeah, what do you want?" Or words to that effect. And Jerry said, "Oh, Mr. Kaczynski, Jerry Burns, United States Forest Service, I have these two gentlemen here from so-and-so mining company. And we're trying to locate the corner posts of your property so that when their employees come up later on this spring, they don't encroach on your property. Butch told us that you didn't want them on your property, and they're trying to make sure they know where your property." And he said, "Well, my corner posts are clearly marked." And Jerry said, No, they're not. They're under snow. We can't see them. It'd really be good if you came out and pointed them out to us, keep us from tramping around on your property. And he said, "Oh, okay." And he opened the door and took a step out. And the plan was, if he gets within arm's reach, grab him. And he put himself within arm's reach of Jerry, and Jerry snatched him. And he started struggling and fighting. And Tom McDaniel is a big guy, big old cowboy. Tom's about, 6'3", 250 pounds or something. So Tom wrapped him up, and he was still kind of struggling around, and I got the privilege of walking around behind him and putting my 6-hour in his nose and showing him my credentials and identified myself. And he just kind of went limp and was very compliant with all of our requests after that. And we removed him from the property. In the meantime, the day before, we had brought well over 100 people from all over the country into Helena and into Lincoln to serve the search warrant. We had EOD people from D.C. We had laboratory from the FBI laboratory. We had bomb explosives team that we had put together for Unabomber devices. We had San Francisco's ERT team there. We had San Francisco's SWAT teams there who surrounded the cabin in case he bolted and got away from us older guys to keep him from getting up into the mountains and so forth. And so they conducted the search, and we held him in custody until they found something incriminating enough in his cabin that we could take to the court and get an arrest warrant, which we did the following morning.
All right, so you've got to tell us.
Go ahead.
I was going to say, you have to tell us what you were feeling inside. I mean, how long have you been working on this case now at this point?
It was 3 years, yeah.
Okay.
A little 3+, but yeah, it was full time. It was 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Very few days off or vacations. Your life was consumed by it.
So what do you feel?
Relation. We got him. We got him out, and we held him in a elk hunting cabin, which was about 75 yards away from his cabin, which was not occupied. And Paul Wilhelmus, postal inspector, and I attempted to interview him. He invoked his Miranda rights and said that he didn't want to talk to us, but I said, well, it's going to be a long day. We're going to be here while the cabin's being searched. Be nice to talk to you. And he said, well, I'll talk to you about anything but the case. So we talked about all kinds of stuff. We talked about hunting, and we talked about fishing, and we talked about eating, and we talked about cooking, and we talked about all these. And then in the middle of this, he'd throw out these details like the Humbug Contour Trail and like down at the Miller cabin and so forth. So we arrested him at a little after noon, or we detained him at a little after noon. And he asked all the appropriate questions. Can you take these handcuffs off? No. Can you loosen these handcuffs? No. Am I free to get up and walk around the cabin? No. Can I leave? No. Kind of sounds like I'm under arrest. Said, no, we're detaining you for your own protection. And bomb people and bomb sniffing dogs, and you're going to stay here while the search goes on. So, at a little after 5, or a little before 5, we heard kind of a hoop go up from the area of his cabin. A lot of cheering and what have you. And said, they must have found something good. And sure enough, a short time later, Terry Turchie and Jim Freeman came down and said, okay, we found incriminating evidence in there, and you've been authorized to change him from being detained to being under arrest. So I apprised him that his status had just changed from detention to arrest, and we brought him out and proceeded to take him to Helena to book him into jail. By that time, the media was there in force. They were all over the place. There were media trucks with their satellite things and hundreds of them. And this is rural Lincoln, Montana. So we took off in Tom McDaniel's bureau vehicle, which was a white Ford Bronco. You will remember the infamous white Ford Bronco in Los Angeles. We kind of looked like that as we're going the 70-some miles back to Helena, up and across the Continental Divide with all of these vehicles behind us. Paul and I are in the back seat with him sandwiched in between us. Tom is driving. Terry and Jim are in another car. And we can't really hear what's going on up in front. But about halfway there, we hear Tom in a very animated conversation with Terry and Jim. And we don't know what's going on. So as we get over the Continental Divide and start coming down into Helena, the parade of cars behind us now says, aha, they're taking him to jail. That's what they assume. So all of the news media broke off from us and went roaring to the Lewis and Clark County Jail to get set up for when we brought him in to get their photographs of him, because nobody had seen him up at this point. Much to our surprise, Paul and mine, we don't go to the Lewis and Clark County Jail. We drive to the Helena Resident Agency, which is right downtown in Helena, Montana on Last Chance Gulch. And what in the hell is going on? And Tom says, don't ask, just come on, bring him out. We're taking him to the RA. So we took him to the RA. And one group of journalists who were from the University of Montana School of Journalism bumper locked us and stayed with us. So when we got out of the car and had to walk to the building, they got all kinds of good pictures. These kids were great. They did their job as journalists, and they got their pictures.
And that's the photos that you sent me that I'm going to put up with the show notes for this episode.
The front of the Newsweek magazine and the one of us walking across the parking lot where you can see his clothes falling off of him. So we get into the RA and we say, what is going on? What are we bringing him here for? And they said, take him in the interview room. Here's what's going on. Unbeknownst to us, you talk about fighting bureaucracy. Unbeknownst to us, back in Washington, D.C., the Deputy Attorney General in charge of the investigation under Janet Reno has been getting fed information by people other than us, and who has found out that we have arrested Ted Kaczynski, and he has called out and ordered us to release him and to take the information that we found to a grand jury and get an indictment and then go back and get him later.
Oh, you've got to be kidding.
No. And I told Terry, and Terry agreed with me. I said, there's no way I'm releasing this guy. So for the next, that was at about, 7 o'clock. For the next over 4 hours, Terry and Jim and the Assistant United States Attorney in Helena, Bernie Hughley, who also was a former FBI agent who came home to become an Assistant United States Attorney, went to battle with the United States Department of Justice in Washington, D.C., and to get that decision overturned.
And why were they even considering that? I mean, you had evidence. I mean, you told me about the bomb that was under his mattress.
Yeah.
Why would they not?
Because that attorney wanted to do it the gentlemanly way and get an indictment and get it all wrapped up, because if you take him into an initial appearance in the morning, the clock will start ticking and we're going to have to start jumping through legal hoops right away, and we want to be able to do this in a gentlemanly fashion by blah, blah, blah. And we said,
what?
Screw this. we've been investigating this case for 16 years. We're ready. We don't need. The clock can start ticking right now, the legal clock, on what we have to do. We're not releasing him. And they took a telephone call to the director, who in turn was at home, reached out and found the attorney general, and she in turn had to reach out and find this deputy attorney general, and I don't know if she ordered him, but strongly suggest that he rescind that order and to allow us to book him and take him to his initial appearance the following morning, which is what we did.
Wow.
So, sometimes jobs are made difficult by people who, shouldn't be in the positions that they're in at the time. So we arraigned him the next morning with his initial appearance. One of the bomb experts at the scene, they had not found the bomb yet, but what they found were 5 or 6 3-ring binders full of his experimentation with explosives and explosive mixtures and tensile strength of pipes and electricity and batteries and what have you, to the point where the bomb guy could say, he's in, and then some various chemicals that he was in possession of information and chemicals capable of producing bombs, and so that's what he appeared on, not as a Unabomber. Then later they found the additional bombs. We found his autobiography. We found his encrypted notebook in which he confessed to all 16 of the bombs and so forth. So it became...
And where was all of that? Where was all of that?
In the cabin. The cabin was 10 foot by 12 foot, about, not quite 10 by 12, with a loft. And we took 44,000 pages of writing out of there. He had everything, that he confessed to every bomb. He confessed, all of his experimentations. It was just like a treasure trove of information for us. But it took the evidence response team 9 days to search that cabin.
A 10 by 12 cabin, 9 days?
With a loft, yeah.
What was
you just don't walk in the front door of the most successful booby trapper in the history of the United States. So the bomb people went in first, and they went around to the back of the cabin, went up to the loft level, and cut a hole in the wall, and entered the cabin through the loft, and then searched downward. And the loft was full of all kinds of stuff. I mean, it was just cram-packed full of things that he had. His bomb-making kit was up there. His disguise kits were up there. His 3 typewriters were up there. The last thing that they opened after 9 days was a Smith Corona circa 1925 to 30 typewriter with pica-style type at 2.54 spacing. And the documents examiner from the laboratory was on scene. He took the sample from it, compared it, and said, "This is the typewriter." So that was a day I was waiting for. All the rest was immaterial as far as I was concerned.
And at that point, I take it you're convinced that he is the guy.
Jim Freeman noted in his day planner, this was pre-cell phone and all that kind of stuff, noted in his day planner, like, I forget what it was, 4 days before the search went down and the arrest went down, that I had finally admitted to him that I believed there was a possibility that this was the Unabomber. He had it underlined in red and asterisk.
Wow. So how long before you actually get to, you go to trial with this, I take it. He doesn't plead guilty.
Well, he was offered a plea right away, and he refused. And so he ended up with a criminal defense team, some of the best criminal defense lawyers in the nation. I don't know, Judy Clark was his lead defense attorney. Judy Clark was a former head of the Defense Lawyers Association of America, or whatever it is. She's the woman who she also defended Eric Robert Rudolph later. She defended that woman back east that killed her kids in the car, drowning them and all.
In South Carolina?
Yeah, she's a criminal defense attorney. She was his lead attorney. And Then he had the chief public defender of Sacramento because his first trial was going to be in Sacramento. And what do they call it? The anti-death penalty people, they had their lead attorney with him because we were going to charge him with the death penalty. So anyway, he put us through all the hoops. So we transferred the entire task force from San Francisco to Sacramento with all the evidence and everything in preparation of the trial. We were up there for months preparing and getting ready for the trial. We went through all the pretrial motions and so forth. He raised all kinds of cane with his attorneys because we became curious when he wouldn't appear at certain hearings, pretrial hearings, which he was supposed to do. And his attorneys would file whatever it is with the court asking for him to be excused, and the court would say, okay. And so he didn't have to appear. And we started wondering, we wonder why he's not appearing at these things. And so we had an analyst start plotting it out. And she came up with a very good observation. He doesn't appear in court on any of the days when his attorneys are discussing the ramifications of his legal defense with the court. And so they are talking as if they are going to use a diminished capacity defense, even though he's got an IQ of 170, even though he did all this stuff. So they ask for a court examination to determine his suitability for trial. So the court went along with him and appointed Dr. Sally Johnson, who was the lead psychologist or psychiatrist for the Federal Bureau of Prisons, to examine him. And that was a major deal because Ted Kaczynski doesn't like psychiatrists and psychologists. He hates them. But he agreed to talk with Dr. Johnson. So she got all his writings. She got everything that she could familiarize herself with, and she interviewed him and what have you. And she came back and told the court that, in her view, he was a paranoid schizophrenic, but that he met the requirements of the McNaughton rule in that he knew the difference between right and wrong. He knew what he was doing was wrong. He wrote about it. He avoided detection and so forth. So he was mentally capable of standing trial. So now he's going to stand trial, but he's not appearing at these hearings. So one day, in order to bring it to the forefront, our lead attorney, Bob Cleary from Newark, New Jersey, when the court said, is there any other, and Kaczynski was present in court, and the court said, is there any other thing on the table that we need to talk about? And Bob stood up and said, yes, there is, Your Honor. The court said, okay, what is it? And Bob essentially said, well, we want to discuss with you the ramifications of Mr. Kaczynski pleading not guilty by virtue of a diminished mental capacity. And man, Kaczynski went nuts at the defense table. He threw a pencil. He mouthed as loud as he could without screaming or, so that not the whole court to Judy Clark, is that what you've been telling them? Because he had written extensively that he didn't want to be portrayed as a sicko or a mentally ill person. And she's trying to calm him down, and she's trying to settle him down. And so now he files papers with the court.
So he wasn't the one that was purposely not going to trial. They weren't telling him.
They weren't telling him what they were going to plead, what their defense was going to be.
Wow.
He wanted to use the trial as a forum for his ideas, and they wanted to portray him as being mentally ill, and he didn't want to be portrayed as a sickie. So now he files on his own. He files papers with the court asking to represent himself and to fire all his attorneys. And we're getting close to trial time now, and the court's saying no. So he said, well, then I want so-and-so, a very well-known left-wing attorney out here to represent me because he's offered to represent me. And they said, no, it's too late. They ruled that he had to go with the attorneys he had. So he then posed to the court, well, you ruled me mentally sane in order to stand trial. Why don't I get to choose my own defense? Why do I have to allow my attorneys to choose my defense? And the court said, that's interesting. He presented the court with a very unique problem. Who gets to choose their defense? A mentally competent defendant or his attorneys? Well,
excellent point.
The court ruled that he did. So his defense team, and this is after, many hearings, the defense team now has to change their legal strategy from presenting him as having diminished mental capacity to he did what he did out of requisite necessity, which was fine.
What does that mean? What does that mean?
He did it because he had to.
Okay. And what does that mean?
He was compelled. He was compelled to do it. It's a standard. It's a legal standard, requisite necessity.
Okay.
So now we go through 2 weeks almost or whatever of impaneling a jury. Got the jury all impaneled, and we're ready to go to trial. And he learns that if he's convicted, there will be a separate trial for sentencing. And he learns from the court that in this second trial of sentencing, his attorneys can now use diminished capacity as a mitigating circumstance to get him a lesser sentence. And he goes berserk again. You are not going to portray me. What are my alternatives? And the court's alternatives were, well, the only way around that legally is you got to plead guilty. He said, let me consult with my attorneys in the government. So within the court adjourns, the jury's sitting in the other room. Within 30 minutes, his attorneys come to our office, consult with our attorneys, and our attorney, Bob Cleary, we had all of the victims present from all over the country in a witness room. And Bob Cleary went into the victims and said, here's the deal. He's this old, and if you want us to go to trial on it right now, we'll go to trial, and we'll try to seek the death penalty. But he is willing right now to plead in return for no death penalty. And the court will sentence him to 4 life sentences consecutively, and he'll never see the light of day. But if one of you tell us that he should go to trial, we'll take him to trial. And the witnesses, or the victims and the victim's family to a person said, don't bother. Don't give him a foreign to spew his vile thoughts and what have you. Take the plea, lock him away so he'll never see the light of day. And that's what we did. Wow. Even though we were up in trial, we were in legal proceedings with the court for months, he finally pleaded out to what we'd offered him up front in the very beginning. So,
and this is on the first day where you would have had testimony.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yep. The court told him he had 30 minutes to work out a deal. Otherwise, the jury was going to come in and we were going to start trial immediately. And it wasn't to avoid the death penalty. It was in order to keep from being portrayed as having diminished mental capacity.
And so that's...
And he wrote extensively about that.
And so when you talk about individual egos, when we were talking that sentence that kind of summed up the case at the beginning, you were probably talking about investigators, but this whole thing at the end is summed up by an individual ego, and that ego is Ted Kaczynski's.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. He played an important and integral part of it.
Wow. So, where is he, and what is he doing now?
He's serving 4 consecutive life sentences at the Supermax prison, federal prison in Florence, Colorado.
How old is he now?
Let's see. He's 74, I believe. Might just be 73. I can't remember his actual birth date, but I think he's 74.
You know, I hate to say this, but I'm thinking of him sitting in a jail cell, or within the prison population, with access probably to books and all kinds of interesting reading material. And I'm thinking about him in a cabin in Montana, with all of his stuff and being able to research and let his mind flow. And I'm not really seeing a difference, except for the fact that he has to deal with people.
He's in essentially solitary confinement 23 hours a day.
Well, he's probably doing just fine then.
Oh, he is. He's adapted very well. All the reports out of the prison are he's getting along very well. He gets 1 hour in an exercise yard, I believe, a day. He gets to go out it's like a dog run, and I believe there's 3 of them. At least that's what it used to be. 3 of these runs where 3 prisoners get to come out at once and exercise. He had exercise time in that yard at the same time as Timothy McVeigh before he was executed, and the blind sheik from the first World Trade Center bombing. And I always called Kaczynski the equal opportunity hater. He hated anything and everything that wasn't him. And he and McVeigh used to, according to the guards, team up on the blind sheik and give him a ration all the time because they didn't like the blind sheik. I've learned subsequent.
Yeah, he was a terrorist.
Yeah. Well, I learned subsequent to McVeigh's execution, and I don't know who the other one is. It's now in their little threesome, but that he and the blind sheik have become buddies. Now, I don't know that for a fact, but that's what several people who have access to the prison have told me, that he and the blind sheik now are big buddies.
Yeah, that's nice. That's nice.
Yeah. But his little cell is about the same size as his cabin. It has one window up real high, and it's a very narrow window, and he can't see anything except sky. And he has a sleeping platform very similar to what was in his cabin. He has a toilet, and he has a little desk. He may now, I don't know. Last I heard, he didn't even have a television. He writes prolifically. He gets things smuggled out of the jail through, I'm sure, legal mail and that kind of stuff. And he's become a darling of the environmental liberation people.
Oh, great. Oh, great.
Yeah.
All right. So, at what point was this case over for you? At what point did you realize, I could close this file and move on?
Well, after the prosecution, after that happened, my boss, Jim Freeman, retired before that happened. We're in Sacramento. Then we come back to San Francisco, and the case has got to be put away. Evidence has to be returned. Performance packages have to be written for people who are deserving of them, and those kinds of things. And Turchie, my immediate boss, who's now an ASAC of the San Francisco division, gets dubbed to go to the Southeast Regional Task Force in Atlanta, Georgia, to head up the search for Eric Robert Rudolph, the Olympic bomber and the abortion clinic bomber. So Terry comes to me and said, hey, I want you to go with me to North Carolina, or to Georgia, and then subsequently North Carolina on this Eric Robert Rudolph thing.
And you say?
Okay. I said, okay. So I went with him. And we got to Atlanta, and they said, okay, the task force that we put together, and they modeled it as much as they could after Unabomber, is based out of Murphy, North Carolina, which is clear out in the end of North Carolina, out above Alabama and below Tennessee and what have you. So I accompanied Terry to Murphy, North Carolina, and we're looking for a suitable location for the task force, and we're out in rural Andrews, North Carolina. And Terry says, look, I want you to do an operational survey for me. I've got to go to the various divisions because we had all this bureaucratic crap going on down there between the SAC Atlanta, the SAC Birmingham, the SAC Charlotte, and ATF. Fortunately, SAC from ATF down there is now the SAC. It was the ASAC and ATF here with us, so Terry had a good working relationship. He said, I got to go put all this political stuff together, do an operational survey for me. So I did. I spent 30 days doing an operational survey, and Terry is in and out, and I give it to him, and I said, Terry, this is going to be just like Unabomber. He's disappeared into these mountains somewhere. We aren't going to find him until we come across a citizen or someone who comes up with the right information. We're outsiders here. I'm old. I'm ready to retire. Send me back home and let me retire. He said, okay, I'll send you back if you go back and get rid of all that evidence and write the performance packages for everybody and retire. And so he sent me home, and he brought my counterpart, Joel Moss, who's 20-some years younger than me, back to assist him in that hunt. And I got to write the final report, do the performance packages for everybody, and return all of the evidence that I could, and then I retired. Terry went on and headed up that hunt for Eric Robert Rudolph for most of the time until he was caught.
What a way to spend, the last years of your career with the FBI.
Oh yeah, it was great after it was over. I didn't think so much at the time. And one of the things I forgot to mention here, and I should have, I'm sorry I didn't, was that one of the things in the manpower, when we were needing so much manpower, that Director Freeh did, which was, I thought, just absolutely outstanding, and again, it broke the rules, was that rather than sending us a lot more TDY agents to come and spend 30 days, 60 days, or whatever, he sent us new agents from 2 or 3 new agents classes that were graduating. All the new agents came to Unabomber, and they were young and enthusiastic and just were whirling dervishes. And we coupled them with journeyman experienced agents to work as teams. And it was such a pleasure to have them with their enthusiasm. And, older agents are skeptical. Oh, it's this old dog case. We're never going to solve it. Who the hell wants to work this, But having these young, energetic agents was just absolutely outstanding.
Yeah, definitely something that's not normally done.
Yeah, and it was again, it was breaking a rule, Doesn't says that those agents had to go someplace else. They all came here. See, there was another little interesting thing, that I just completely skipped over, the connection between the Polly Class case and this case.
Oh, there is a connection?
Oh, absolutely.
What's the connection?
I don't know if you were well aware of the Unabomber case, but there were 2 different composites. Remember how I told you about the first composite, and there was the yellow hair, the first artist put yellow hair on him?
Right.
And one of the first things that I did was I'm reviewing that file for all the information we had on the only one time that he was seen, which was in Utah. And I go in there, and there's like 5 different artist concepts, all done on a different day, and all just a little bit different. And I wondered why. So I went into George Clow, because George told me I got to do significant stuff if I came on this case. And I said, hey, this doesn't make sense to me. And I located this witness who's the only person who's ever seen him. She lives out of state. Can I go interview her? He said, sure. So I did. She was at Cam's the day the bomb was placed, and she was within about 2.5 feet of the bomber as he placed the bomb right behind her left front tire of her vehicle. And so she got a real good look at him. So I went and interviewed her. And I contacted her, set up an appointment, and she knew I was coming. Got there, and I talked to her. And she was just adamant about her description of him. And I said, well, what was it? Why are there 5 different ones of these on a different day? She says, because he wasn't getting what I was telling him. He kept changing stuff, but he wasn't changing the important stuff. And I said, well, what was the important stuff? She tells me. And I said, well, how can you be so sure of that? And she said, well, because I reviewed my notes before you came. And I said, your notes? What do you mean your notes? There's no notes from you in the file. Yeah, I always wondered about that. The day that happened, when the FBI and the police got there, they interviewed me, and then they told me, go over and sit down over there and write down everything you can remember. Everything you can remember, no matter how about that, write it down. But you know what? Nobody ever came back and got those notes from me.
Wow.
I still have them. They're in the other room here. You want me to see them? So she gave me a copy of her notes. So, Polly Class, the case, had just finished. Jim Freeman, my boss, was the SAC in charge of that case. Eddie Fryer was the case agent. And they had used a police forensic artist named Jeannie Boylan to do an artist concept of the individual who's kidnapped Polly Class out of her bedroom that night at a slumber party. And Jeannie Boylan interviewed all those little girls and did this composite. Well, if you took the composite that Jeannie Boylan drew from those little girls' descriptions and put it beside the booking photo of Richard Allen Davis after Eddie arrested him, they're exact. And my whole observation is most police forensic or most police composite artists at that time, they give you a book of noses to look at, and a book of ears to look at, and a book of chins to look at, and a book of face size to look at, and so forth. And they put it all together, and it always had that. It always looked like a Mr. Potato Head drawing. It had the features, but Jeannie Boylan was an artist. So I tell Freeman about that, and Freeman said, well, get Jeannie Boylan. Let's see if she can do it. So got Jeannie Boylan out. She liked the Bureau because she liked working with Eddie Fryer. She liked working with our assistant SAC at that time, Mark Mershon, who she thought the world of. So I went and I proposed it to her. And she said, you know, I've never done it on a witness from 7 years previous, but I'd be happy to do it. So I took Jeannie Boylan up to Utah, got her with the witness. Then the exciting life of an FBI agent, I got to entertain Tammy's 2.5-year-old son for the duration of the afternoon by playing on the floor with him with his toys and watching The Lion King. And Jeannie came up with the new composite, which we requested be done in black and white. From my criminal experience, I said, hey, every hump that robs a bank puts on a disguise. Why would this guy not put a disguise on when he goes out in public to place bombs? And sure enough, what we found out, that yellow wig and his planting of yellow evidence, yellow hairs in his bombs and what have you. But the subsequent composite was done by Jeannie Boylan, who had done so well on the Polyclass case. So Unabomber affects everything.
Oh, my God, yeah. So was that picture, did it look like him?
That's the one that we used in our investigation from that point on.
Well, the famous one, of course, is with the hoodie and the dark glasses.
Yeah, well, that's what ours is. It's the hoodie and the dark glasses.
Oh, that's the one you're talking about. That's the one that was done by the artist?
Well, the black and white one is. The other one had the colored hair and the tear-shaped face.
Right.
And she didn't like that one, and so Jeannie captured the likeness.
I think I'm looking at it now.
If you take a picture of Ted Kaczynski, his official photograph from University of California, Berkeley, and put it beside Jeannie Boylan's composite, they're right on. And the prominent feature is this jutting, strong jawline. Anyway, Unabomicides, there's tons of them.
Now, this was fantastic. I really appreciate it. So, what are you doing now? I mean, how can you top that?
I keep busy. Like I said, I get called upon by the FBI in various places. In December, I was in Albuquerque and did my case presentation to the Albuquerque All-Employee Conference, and then the next day to the Albuquerque Citizens Academy Alumni Dinner. And a couple months before that, I was in Tucson or in El Paso doing the same thing. I speak around on this. I'm a consultant for the California Department of Corrections. I serve on their Deadly Force Review Board, where we review, we're all retired professional law enforcement people, former chiefs of police and sheriffs, myself, what have you. We review all uses of deadly force within the 33 institutions and the entire parole division of the California Department of Rehabilitation, Corrections and Rehabilitation. So, you know, we meet quarterly and they send us the reports and we review them not for legal compliance, but rather for compliance to policy and procedure, make sure that they follow the rules and regulations, and we look at them each case for trends, for training and equipment and that kind of stuff too. So that's fun. Keeps my finger in a little bit in the law enforcement realm.
So when you look back on your career and you look back on this case, what are the reflections? You know, what are the things that you say to yourself about what you've been able to accomplish?
Well, you know, I was very disappointed at first to be chosen by Inspector Clow, although it was an honor to, you know, so to speak, that he wanted me, and I had to go and do it. I had some things going on in my life at the time which made it difficult. My wife was going through breast cancer and trying to do credit to my case and help her get through that ordeal was, difficult, but, we did it. So I would, if I had my druthers, I would have been probably retired and not doing anything at that particular time. But as it turned out, it was very, very beneficial. I made some lifelong relationships with people. I was able to write this book with Terry and Jim. We went on a book tour together for several months during 2014. I've met a lot of great people, still have lots of contact with, and, the relationships with people like Butch Goering up in Montana. Butch has died, unfortunately, but Jerry Burns with the Forest Service Office, and Tom McDaniel, and, people I would never have met otherwise. It has been very rewarding and nice. So, and it gave us an opportunity during the pre-trial of this. We had all of the evidence back at FBI headquarters, and there was lots of evidence from all of the bombings and all of the other evidence. And they gave us a big room in the subterranean basement of Bureau headquarters, and we had all of the evidence laid out on, we arranged it by device and so forth, and we were bringing the attorneys and the agents, PIs, and what have you, would be introducing that evidence in for trial, and pre-trying them with, where they found it, what they did, and putting together the crime scene photographs and the evidence and the 302s, and putting all that together. And it afforded me an opportunity to spend quite a bit of time in D.C., not that I had, I'd been to D.C. back and forth, but never for extended periods of time. So that was kind of nice. I could bring my wife back, and she and I could spend weekends, in Washington doing the things that tourists do in Washington, D.C. and the surrounding area, and, going to Gettysburg and Antietam. I'm kind of a Civil War buff. I enjoy that history. And so that was nice, So there were a lot of positives out of it, but at the time I wouldn't have told you that. So there were a lot of positives, there were a lot of negatives, but there were certainly a lot of positives too.
And that's the end of the interview. Over at jerrywilliams.com, you'll find photos of Max Noel. You'll see that Unabomber composite drawing he mentioned. There's also an FBI overview of the case and a Washington Post timeline and a link to the Unabomber's manifesto. Oh, I almost forgot to mention that there's also a link to the book that Max Noel wrote with SAC Jim Freeman and ASAC Terry Turchie, Unabomber, How the FBI Broke Its Own Rules to Capture the Terrorist Ted Kaczynski. If you enjoyed listening to Max talk about the Unabomber, I hope you share the episode with your friends, family, and associates. I make it easy for you. At the bottom of the episode show notes over at jerrywilliams.com, you'll find all the social media share buttons. During the interview, you heard Max Noel talk about using the same artist as they did for the Poly class abduction case. And I want you to know the reason he mentioned that is because next week I am interviewing retired agent Eddie Fryer, who was the case agent on the Poly class abduction child murder case. So you want to come back again next week to hear that. It's absolutely heartbreaking. Now for my crime fiction recommendation. I just finished reading The Knowledge by Steven Pressfield. Now you probably know Steven Pressfield as the author of The Legend of Bagger Vance, Gates of Fire, The Lion's Gate, and the nonfiction books, The War of Art, Turning Pro, and The Authentic Swing. The Knowledge is a combination. He took his life story and fictionalized it, which is so fun to read because you don't know what's true It's a story about the high crime 1970s in New York when Stephen Pressfield, in real life, was driving a cab and tending bar as he tried to write the great American novel. It was his third attempt in a row writing what became an unpublishable novel. During this time period, his boss, the owner of the cab company, hires Stephen Pressfield to follow his wife to find out what she's up to, assuming that she's having an affair. It's a tale about Pressfield's journey into the criminal underworld and also a tale of him trying to find his muse and fighting resistance as he tries to write his novel. For a person like me who is writing crime fiction and loves to read crime fiction, this book was absolutely amazing. So I hope you pick up a copy of Stephen Pressfield's The Knowledge. And of course, while you're at Amazon.com, I hope you take a look at my crime novel, Pay to Play, about a female FBI agent investigating corruption in the Philadelphia strip club industry. This episode was sponsored by FBIRetired.com, the only online directory made available to the general public featuring retired FBI agents and analysts interested in showcasing their skills to secure business opportunities. I want to thank you for listening, and I hope you come back again for another episode of FBI Retired Case File Review with Jerry Williams. Thank you.